Grayson Zulauf, who's a PhD candidate at Stanford. He's going to discuss one of the drivers of the need for an improved grid. I think we can all appreciate the promise of cutting the cord for our devices. Not having to plug it in. I think we can all agree instead of having to chase around where's that USB port or that plug. But can we cut the cord for electric vehicles too? Grayson's going to focus his presentation on wireless charging technology. It may be closer than I'd imagined. Here you go, Grayson.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? So in 1911, GE treasurer Samuel Whitstone installed an electric vehicle charger in his garage to charge his EV. And 4 years later, GE was ready to bring this product to the market on every street corner. 100 years later, the technology has advanced so much that Nissan's actually bringing the same thing to charge the car in your garage, and the EV chargers we see everywhere are identical, more or less, to what GE was bringing to market 100 years ago. But in the future, we have tons of EVs coming. McKinsey estimates in the base case 140 million EVs by 2030. So how are we going to charge all of these? Are we going to go with the infrastructure that was developed 100 years ago? And how are we going to install that? So today, because of battery costs, subsidies still drive EV adoption. There's basically a perfect mapping between the size of subsidies in the country and the EV penetration. And there's an enormous amount of charging infrastructure required. So I just read yesterday, this one has like 50 billion, but Goldman estimated 6 trillion in charging infrastructure, about half for chargers and half for grid infrastructure, maybe including smart wires, we'll see. So today, wireless charging has the promise to replace the paradigm that was started 100 years ago. And the reason it's so promising are 3 things I want to highlight. One is that wireless charging, which is the same idea that we use for smartphones today in Starbucks, starts and stops automatically without an operator needing to intervene. It can be distributed in space, so you can recharge your car at a stoplight or at a bus stop. And then lastly, you also in the future might be able to do it in motion. So when you combine those, you might be able to reduce the battery size in an electric vehicle, the most expensive parts, by recharging periodically throughout the day in small chunks. So why don't we see wireless charging everywhere? So for an iPhone, which you do see everywhere, a wireless charger is like 10 bucks or something. But when we go to the hundreds of kilowatts, which you would need to recharge at a stoplight or so, they're in the million, hundreds of thousands dollars range. So one at Long Beach that was just installed was $1 million for 50 kilowatts. So that means that OEMs are bringing them to market as a luxury replacement in your garage, so you don't have to remember to plug in your car when you get home. But to me, that's kind of like saying we have the technology to refuel airplanes in flight, but instead we're just going to give you a gas station attendant for a few $1,000s. And so the reason that these systems are so expensive and their usefulness is so limited today are 2 primary components. Magnetic ferrites, which shape the magnetic field, and Litz wire. And even including installation, those are something like 88% of the system costs. So our goal in our research group's approach is to increase the operating frequency by 100 times while keeping the same efficiency. So if we look at frequency and power, commercial EV chargers are all down here at 85 kilohertz. But we think we can eliminate those components by operating in the megahertz regime. And we've demonstrated this with a 500-watt prototype, which Sally and the Precourt Institute has given us some seed funding to scale to 10 kilowatts in the next year, which starts to be interesting for both overnight EV charging and charging at stoplights or bus stops or when you're unloading packages in your FedEx. So this is enabled by 2 things. One are new materials for semiconductors. So in power, gallium nitride and silicon carbide are going to replace silicon in a lot of applications. That allows you to work at higher frequencies, which enables breakthroughs in the coils, which are actually used to couple the power. So this is from a Dartmouth spin-out, where they had a 10x cost reduction and a 6x increase in performance by stacking the coils in an intelligent manner. So then the other problem is we need these on all the cars and in all the roads. But we want to start with commercial vehicles, which run fixed routes, and where you might be able to start with installing a few strategically placed chargers with small battery sizes on the vehicles. So this might look like in New York City, thousands of commitments to electric vehicles could share the same chargers in the roadways, from buses to garbage trucks to passenger cars. Or in ports, which have tons of different cars, big rigs moving around. And Long Beach has already spent $13 million per mile to do a prototype system with overhead wires. So there's already interest in this dynamic recharging of EVs, and we're just aiming to get the cost down such that wireless charging can be the infrastructure for the mass electrification of our transit system. So thank you very much, and I'd love to take questions afterwards.